G'day guys, so if you haven't heard of Ryan Chatterson before, then I might fill you in a little bit before we get to the interview. If you don't want to, skip right to there and we'll get started. But he's one of the best aquaponic people I've been able to find. He popped up on the forums a couple of years ago and we could tell that he knew what he was talking about, which is quite an achievement on there. He's really good with information, so when I have a video coming out and I'm not quite sure of some of the specifics, I usually pop him a question and he comes back really quickly, which is quite good considering he's quite time strapped and that sort of thing. So I owe a lot to him with a lot of the videos, the ideas and everything that I got, so I was quite happy when he agreed to an interview. So keep tuned. I'm sure there are a lot of people watching that have got no idea about who you are. So do you want to give us a bit of a rundown, tell us about Aquaponics, how you got started and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, sure will. So if you don't know me, again, my name's Ryan Chatterson and I've been doing aquaponics for a little over 15 years now. So it seems like quite a long time. How I got started though was back in high school. I was doing hydroponic projects for a science fair and got really interested in growing vegetables using hydroponic methods. And then after that, going into college, I studied biology and I kind of grew up in a freshwater lake area. We're in Florida, there's lakes everywhere. So a big part of my life was outdoors, in the wildlife, out on lakes, in the water. So I had a big interest in fishing and in fish in general. One day I came across an article by Dr. James Ricosi talking about aquaponics and how you can merge the production of fish with hydroponic vegetable production, and from the moment I read that article I was hooked. So I went home, I worked up my own little homemade system of a fish tank with tilapia, hooked it onto some NFT channels, and that's how I got started. So from there I went on to work at one of the largest aquaculture equipment manufacturers in the world, and I was able to develop my skills further and grow further within the industry. Now I left that company, Aquatic Ecosystems, a little over 3 years ago, and that's when I started my own farm, and we've been out here on my own ever since.
Okay, so there's a lot of failed aquaponic farms out there that I've seen, and it must have been a bit of a risk going into it given the track record of a lot of places. So what were your biggest challenges you ran into?
Sure, definitely risky. For me, I think less of the challenges were growing plants because I was really familiar with aquaponic plant and fish production. More of the challenges were entering the market, getting into the marketplace, building a name for the farm so that people recognized it and the name was actually worth something, and that people wanted our vegetables over the other vegetables that are available in the area. And again, I'm right outside of Orlando. We've got over 100,000 restaurants because of our large tourism industry. So there is a huge need for fresh local foods that are just not here. There's not actually many farms. I think the closest vegetable farm to me is maybe 20-25 miles away. So there's not a lot of farms for how many restaurants there are that are utilizing that product. And the number one selling item on their menu is going to be locally grown. That means a lot to restaurants, and that means a lot as a grower. But entering that marketplace, I'm a biologist, I'm a technician, a designer. That's different than getting out there and talking to restaurant chefs and selling yourself, beyond growing the product, taking on the marketing and business responsibility. So that was a little bit more of my unfamiliar territory. But it was, when you have a good product, it's a lot easier to figure that stuff out on the way. And we did that. It took a few months, a couple bumps in the road, and reconfiguring what my market really is and where we're going to make our money, but we figured that out, and that's been smooth sailing ever since.
Awesome. And I have seen some of your product online. I've seen some of the photos and it just looks awesome. I'm really jealous about some of the stuff you can actually produce through there. But I've stalked you a little bit on Facebook. I've seen some of the stuff when you go onto the aquaculture, aquaponics sides, and I'm just curious. I saw one of your quotes on there that was saying that existing aquaculture places are throwing out millions of tons worth of veggies, just all the nutrients and everything. Do you have any idea about the rough investment that would be required for them to convert that into an aquaponic system? Or a decoupled one?
But it's unfortunately not a hard number I can give you during this interview because it takes a lot of specific things into consideration. the size of the aquaculture facility, how much feed they're actually feeding into that system per day, where you're located at, so that would depend on what kind of greenhouse structure you need, whether you need lighting for that structure or other cooling apparatuses like a chiller for the water. So a lot of these things are very location dependent, and then they're crop dependent. Are you growing lettuce, or are you growing greenhouses full of tomatoes and cucumbers, things like that? And the investment changes because the equipment changes with kind of each one of those business models. But if you were to say, come to me and say, hey, we're, producing 100,000 pounds a year, or say 50,000 kilos a year of rainbow trout, what's it going to cost to build a facility growing bib lettuce? Well, then I can take that and compute it and actually come up with a harder number for you. But there's so many specific things that are going to change that answer that, a number is going to change very widely depending on where you're at and all those other things.
Okay, awesome. It's good to know, because a lot of stuff might get thrown out when people are building that sort of stuff, and I was just curious. Now, the next question is pretty close to my heart. I've seen a lot of your photos that you put online, and especially tomatoes, which look incredible. You look at the long rows that you've got, and hopefully people watching the video can see some of the photos. But it's just incredible to see how you're doing them. And I'm wondering if you had any insider tricks that go into it. Any CO2 generators, or singing to them at night, or anything that makes them grow better than what we can usually do at home.
So no CO2 generators, no singing to them at night. But really what I've done is I've followed commercial horticulture practices for tomato production. And that's what a lot of backyarders are missing out. They don't know how to trellis a tomato plant to actually get it to produce what it's going to produce in a commercial trial. So training and trellising is very big of the tomato plant. Another thing to keep in mind is that when we're feeding fish food as our nutrient source, it's a high nitrogen nutrient source. I don't have the breakdown in front of me, but it's something like a 12:1.025 fertilizer. So it's a very high nitrogen fertilizer source, and we need to lower the nitrogen in relationship to the potassium and the phosphorus to get the heavy fruiting that you see that I induce in my greenhouse. And you can do that a couple ways. One is by growing leafy green vegetables and other plants that are really going to take up that nitrogen and leave the phosphorus and potassium. So they favor the nitrogen. If you couple them with your tomato production, then you've got one group taking a bit more of the nitrogen out of the water for you and changing that ratio up for your fruiting crops. So that's one way, but the biggest thing I could throw out there is training the crops. Start with a good healthy tomato plant, and from seed, get it growing. You'll have your F1 hybrid vigor if you grow from seed, so it's going to grow a little faster and stronger. And train them to, if you're going to do like me, to a single string trellis up to the top of a wire and move that along throughout the season. Indeterminate tomato plants is what I use in a greenhouse. Backyard planters a lot of times will use determinate tomato plants, which will set all of their fruit at once, and that also leads to a little bit different outcome. But if you wanted the number one thing, training that tomato plant. When you can get them up and you get the airflow through the leaves, they're going to set a lot more fruit and be a lot healthier.
Oh, that's awesome to know. There's so many little tricks you just don't get when you're trying to pick up random little things.
Sure.
Now, I've noticed that backyard aquaponics has exploded. I'm guessing I hope commercial would as much, but there's masses of aquaponic places in people's backyards at the moment. And I wonder if you had any tips from commercial side of things that would translate quite well into a backyard system.
I think the biggest thing to remember is whether it's commercial design or backyard design, the formulas are the same. So if we don't just guess at what size pipe we need and oversize it as big as we can afford, because that's going to make sure we hopefully don't have any clogs. We use a formula to tell us what speed we want the velocity of the water going through that pipe to make sure solids don't settle out, and that allows you to size that pipe properly. So that goes all the way down the line. Sizing aeration properly, sizing the water pump properly. When you have the formulas to do this, whether it's a 100,000 gallon tank or a 100-gallon tank in your backyard, it allows you to choose the proper equipment, which brings down your running costs, your consistent running costs for the operation. And a lot of times you can choose better equipment because it may be smaller than what you had just tried to figure out in the first place, or guessed off of what you saw somebody else do online. When you have the actual formulas, you can choose the proper equipment, and a lot of times it's cheaper than doing it how you saw somebody else do it in the first place.
No, awesome. Now, I put out a video a little while ago on commercial aquaponics, and I discovered there are a few people that are really quite interested in it, just from comments and that sort of stuff. So if you're starting again today and you had to set up another farm and you wanted to go through everything you've done now, how would you do it? What sort of steps would you take?
Yeah, well, if I still had the same background that I do now, I would probably take the same exact steps. I went into this market on my own money, and I entered it slowly, and I'm building from that. So a lot of other people, you get an investor, start out 10 times the size, enter a different marketplace. For me, there was still a lot of things to figure out selling into a local marketplace and about the local economy that are going to be a lot cheaper to discover producing on a smaller scale than if I were to have started up 10 times as big as I am now. So biggest thing I would, if anything, to change is try to lock down contracts before you start producing. If I was a little better at marketing, that might have been something I would have been able to do in the first place. And then you have people that are already going to take your fish on the day of harvest. They're ready to take every one of those fish if you're, say, producing a food fish. Or if you're, you know your planting schedule, and every week you're going to be harvesting 500 heads of bib. Well, a lot of times you can get a hotel to sign a contract for that 500 heads of bib, and it's sold until you screw up your side of the contract and don't fulfill it one week. So if you can, get out there and get it sold before you start producing, because that's going to give you a lot more confidence going into the marketplace, knowing that you just need to produce this stuff now. It's already sold.
No, awesome. And I believe you've now got your own training website, the College of Aquaponics. So I thought you might want to talk it up, tell everybody about it, and why it's better than some of the random ones that I've had people trying to get me to sell on my website on YouTube.
I'm not a huge salesman on this, so I'll put that out there first. I'm a biologist, and I love growing plants and fish, but I've been doing this for a long time, and starting my own farm took a lot of time away from being able to teach other people. I've got a lot of followers, a lot of contacts I've made, doing this for 15 years, and every day another email, somebody that wants to visit the farm or wants to talk about aquaponics or wants to get into it, and I simply don't have the time to do it. So I tried to think about what's the best way we can get people trained with the right information without shutting down my whole farm because of the time that it takes to do that. And for me, that was to tape all this and record it in a college class format so that people can get all of the information. It's available online. You don't have to fly across the world and stay in Florida for a week. And the cost of the class is one thing, but the cost of travel and lodging and everything else that goes with it, and time off of work and away from your family, that makes aquaponics courses extremely expensive, far beyond what the initial price of the class is. So to me, if we can give access to people all around the world, they can learn from their homes, give them access. I give everybody 2 years of access. If they need more, by all means, I'll figure out whatever it costs me to host the data and charge a couple more dollars to continue that on. But the thought is, you don't leave after 3 days and forget half the stuff because you were just wowed with all the beautiful plants and all the people that you met. You've got that information at your fingertips for 2 years. So for all the time you need to get your operation up and going, you can ask questions, you see the design details laid out in front of you, and all the calculations. So I go through calculations. If you do your own design, you can plug your numbers in right there, replay the session where I'm going through it, and make sure that you're doing it right. Beyond that, I can field questions from everybody every single week. So once a week, I do a question and answer session. Any questions anybody had from the lessons, they can send it in. I answer them all personally. So there's no confusion. And then I also do tests and a final exam after every week. So every week there's a test, there's 11 weeks of courses, and then there's a final exam. And this really makes sure that you don't decide, hey, I don't care about plumbing, I want to skip over to aeration, or I don't care about this. You have to learn it in the order that I teach it, because they're all connected. You need to learn the beginning steps before you move on to the more complicated design aspects. Like if we're designing, a high density facility using pure oxygen and 20-foot tall fiberglass filters. This is big equipment and millions of dollars, and you need to be comfortable with it. Even my operation, which I would call a smaller operation, over the years, I think it's cost me close to $60,000, and if I were to have paid people to have done it, it would have been well over $100,000 to build the operation. And that's a lot of money to common folk. That's a lot of money to me. I didn't grow up rich. So I really want people to know what they're getting into and have all those available tools ready at their hands, so that they can make something that's going to work for them. It's not just, hey, copy what I've built here. I show you what I've done here, but I show you every step of the way and how I made those decisions. So if your crop or your market or something like that is different, you can adjust and make sure you're designing the right thing specifically for your operation. And a lot of the other things that I see taught are basically, hey, we built this, copy this, and you're gonna be gold. And that's not how it is. Unless you buy property, you know, next door to me over here, factors change, climates change, markets change, and you need to know how to be able to change that system to adapt and overcome. And I really feel like that's what we've been doing. You know, I've been in operation over 3 years now. We're profitable. I've paid off all my initial investment in the first year. And we are expanding. I'm not filming a lot of it right now, but we're in the middle of an expansion right now, and we're slowly moving into a larger commercial marketplace, and building a name for ourselves. Chatterson Farms and our produce actually means something in the Central Florida area, and I get a higher dollar than my competitors. So I'm in a good place right now. I just need a little bit more time, and I'm lack of time right now.
Sounds pretty good. It sounds like you're doing really well with it. Like I say, if I was going in some sort of commercial system, I would definitely be going through your course, because it's one of the ones that I've seen online that doesn't look dodgy, which is quite good, because there are a lot of dodgy ones on there, and I would actually trust the information coming from you.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah. So thanks for giving me your time today. I'm sure you're quite busy and plenty of fish you got to feed and trellis some more tomatoes and everything. So I appreciate you coming and having a chat. And
yeah, definitely. Great talking to you, Colin. You have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.
You too. Thank you very much.